Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, again, wherever you're joining us, whether you're driving in, you're listening to this as an MP3, whether you're watching this on your couch as a YouTube channel, whatever you're doing, we just want to welcome you and say, we're glad you joined us. And we're glad that you are working with us through this book, Genesis, right now. This has been so much fun. And let me make a couple plugs for our YouTube channel. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video with other people. We are going to grow this station this year. And as always, if you want to continue working with us, joining us financially, we have a way to do that there at the bottom as well. And so today we're going to continue through the book of Genesis. Again, many people will call this the book of origins, right? But again, it's so important to remember the history, the context, the reason behind. And so most of you who have been following along, I think you could probably recite this, right? You know this by now, right? You know, again, Israel in 587 BC, this tiny group of Hebrew people, this tiny tribe, they are basically taken hostage, right? They are their very temple, their way of life has been essentially taken away from them, and they're marched hundreds of miles on foot to Babylon, where again they're going to, like other nations, assimilate. Or at least that's what the empire assumes is going to happen. But Israel, again, is such an interesting nation, and this is why their narrative continues, right? They were different. They were what they would say set apart. And so when they join Babylon, when they're in this empire, they are not taking on Babylonian gods. They're not taking on the Babylonian stories, right? They're not doing these things. Instead, they are coming together. Crisis sometimes has the ability to bring people together. And yes, of course, it can divide, it can destroy, it can conquer, right? The way of Babylon. However, the way of Israel is when there's destruction, when there's pain, when there's brokenness, when the nation's in crisis, that's when people lean in most. And so for the Israelites, they lean in. And the question was, how do we hold on to our identity? As they're leaning in, they're saying, how do we keep this beautiful tradition that we have? How do we keep our tribe alive for our future generations? And the answer was Torah, right? The answer was, we're going to write all of the oral traditions. We're going to write all of our values into these stories. We're going to remember what it means to be Jewish. And so they create Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they compile these beautiful pieces together. And again, there's poetry, right? There's song, there's mythology, there's messages from prophetic voices of the past saying, look, don't go this direction, go this direction, right? This is what Torah was. And this is why, again, Torah for Jewish people today is held in such high regard. It's not just a piece of history for them. It is who they are. It's their very identity. And so as we continue saying every week, Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized. And again, what I mean by that is really simple. Every story in Torah is going to give you another piece of what it means to be Jewish, right? What it means to be a Torah follower, right? A Yahweh follower. It's beautiful. It's their identity. It's who they are. Less about a literal historical telling with literal dates and all that. That was never the point. This is who they are. And we understand it by understanding their language, their cultural context. We understand it by looking at their writers, right? Their scholars first. That's where we go first and foremost, before we begin doing any kind of interpreting of using anything in the last century, right? We go deep, we go far back, and we ask deeper questions. So today we're going to look at Genesis chapter 12. And again, yeah, we're only on chapter 12. I know it's been so fun, right? We're going to get through this book, I promise, but there's so much depth and meaning here. And again, just to skip over a chapter in a week, man, you don't want to do that, right? Sometimes you can, but the majority of the time, 8 to 10 verses, you can undo so much unpacking. So today, chapter 12. And so chapter 12, it begins with, again, this concept that we talked about last week. It begins with this idea of the story, right? The circular story, the Joseph Campbell moment, right? The hero's journey. And so Joseph Campbell again created this beautiful journey. He said in the best of literature, and he actually points to the Jewish narrative. He says the very best of literature, it starts with the hero feeling a call to leave home. And so at some point the hero will leave home and they'll begin to wander for a bit, and they'll face obstacles, and they'll grow from those obstacles. They'll grow stronger until they face the largest obstacle. And when they do, they have a gift to bring back home. And home changes for them. Home is now something here, and here, not necessarily a place. And so everywhere they go now, they bring home with them because they are the story, right? The victory is here. It's the deeper thing that happens to them. And so Israel, wherever they go, they always carry their identity, right? Their story. They always carry it on their backs. That's the deeper image of Torah. And so chapter 12 kind of starts with this idea, with the most important patriarch, right? The one that we see this story, the Joseph Campbell story, most obviously through. And what you'll find is as you read the story of Abraham, you're going to find, the story of Abraham sounds a lot like the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph sounds a lot like the story, Joshua and Moses and Elijah and Elisha. And Jesus, you're going to see over and over again. This story of Israel, it repeats over and over again. And there's real beauty there, right? It is the same story told through different characters, right? Through bigger and bigger tellings, through different contexts culturally. And you're going to see it over and over again. So this one, we move through the character, right? The messianic archetype of Abraham. So I'm going to read you Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 9. So I'll read it first, and then we'll just dig in, right? Here we go. And the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make into you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will aggrandize your name, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you." And Abram went as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had acquired, and the souls they had acquired in Haran, and they went to the land of Canaan. They went to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. And Abram passed through the land until the place of Shechem, until the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanites were in that land. And the Lord appeared to Abram, and he said, "To your seed I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent. Bethel was to the west, and Ai to the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord. And he called on the name of the Lord, and Abram traveled continually, traveling southward. Okay, so a lot to unpack, right? Let's do it. First and foremost, here we go. The Lord said to Abram. Some of your translations will say Abraham, right? Go forth with your land from your birthplace, from your father's house, unto the land that I will show you. Abraham. Now, again, understand this. This is written in a different language. So when you read a name, if you're a Hebrew, an ancient tribal Hebrew, when you read that name has deep, deep meaning, right? The name actually means, and this is something really deep here, the name literally means father, or a better way of saying it in today's understanding would be the founder. The founder. So think about this. All the large companies that you think of, Apple, Steve Jobs. You have all the Bill Gates, Microsoft. All these different bigwigs, right? Zuckerberg and Facebook. All these different people. They start these companies, and they're always deeply connected with them. Their vision, their mission statements, all of it follow them. They're the ones who started the whole thing. right? And so for Israel, the founder, the one that sets the direction for Israel, the one that steps them in this journey, the founder, this messianic archetype of all messianic archetypes, starts with Abraham. And notice this, Abraham, it says he steps away from his father's home. He steps away from his homeland. Interesting, right? So to be an Israelite, understand your identity is wrapped up in this idea that if you're going to be an Israelite, you are essentially starting your journey walking away from tradition. Isn't that heavy? To be an Israelite is to walk away, not to step deeper and deeper into tradition. No, to be an Israelite is to walk in the uncomfortable. To be an Israelite is to step away from tradition, away from the commonplace. Yeah. To be an Israelite, a follower of the divine, is to be an outsider. They understood this over and over again in their story. You see, constantly, they are the outsider. They are the marginalized the majority of the time. They're the ones that don't fit in. And so the very first steps of this messianic character of Abraham, he steps away into something new. And so to be an Israelite, deep in their story, deep into their identity, they understand we're going to be an uncomfortable nation, right? We're not going to have a homeland like Babylon does. We're not going to have a constant safety place to be. That's not going to be our life. To be an Israelite is to be someone who steps away from safety, someone who steps into the unknown. It's someone who navigates the unknown, learns, grows, evolves, shifts, changes, is nomadic. That's what it means to be an Israelite. To be an Israelite, a follower of the divine, is to again leave home. I think of Frodo in the Shire. Every time I read about leaving home, right? You step into the new journey. And it takes just a couple steps sometimes, but you step away from the known, right? And it's not easy, but when you do, there's a whole new world ahead of you. And the Israelites understood this because it's deeply, deeply set in their stories. Every single one. They step away from the unknown. Sometimes it's a really uncomfortable step. Sometimes it's not even them taking the step. Sometimes they are pushed, right? They're pushed into a hole. They're thrown onto a ship, right? So many or off a ship. So many different places in Torah you will find these stories, which again, Israel miniaturized. And so Abraham, again, the father of this new way to be human, this new way of viewing the world, he is where the story starts. He is the founder. And so, again, really interesting, deeply in Hebrew tradition, the rabbis told this story. And I mentioned this a little bit last time, but the story again goes, Israel started with Abraham, leaving his religious structure. And again, the religious structure that he followed was polytheistic, many different gods. In fact, the story goes, Abraham's father was an idol maker. And so again, the story is he's going to take on his father's trade. And so the rabbis would tell this fascinating story of Abraham one day sitting down and his father saying, I'm going to the market, which means Abraham's going to have to sit and sell the idols, these wooden figurines, right? And so as his father leaves, Abraham's moving around and all of a sudden he knocks one of the idols down and it breaks. And he assumes again all heaven and hell will fall on him and this God's going to be angry, but nothing happens. And he realizes, well, that God, there's no power there. And so, of course, Abraham knocks another one and another one, another. And before you know it, he says, my father's gods are dead to me. There is no life in them. And the story says that is the moment Abraham realizes, I cannot stay here anymore. I have outgrown the thing. It no longer fits. And so Abraham walks away from his father's tradition. And historically, we know the Israelites, they move away from a polytheistic tradition into a monotheistic monotheistic one, where they believe there is now one God above all creation, one unknown God, right? One God that is all powerful, all knowing, behind everything. Behind all life, there is one being. And that's how they viewed. And again, they were one of only a few that had this idea. And so the Israelites step onto the scene with Abraham. Was Abraham literally real or not? I don't know for sure, right? But this is the story. This is how it goes. At some point in time, the Israelite nation was birthed. And we know they were a fairly younger generation, a younger tribe of people. We know that historically, archaeologically, but we don't know exactly how. So is this story, maybe, I don't know. But we know that Abraham leaves the tradition. It's uncomfortable. It's not easy. Continuing on, verse 2. And I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I read that this week, and I thought, it's beautiful. But it could mean so many things, especially right now, as we are like a global economy, a global society. There's so many different things going on, but we're also very regimented in our own countries. What does it mean to be a great nation? You've heard certain individuals say, make our nation great again. Others have said our nation's already great. Others have said our nation's never been great. What does it mean to be a great nation? I thought about that for a while because the Hebrew tradition would argue some other things. But we know historically, right? Great nation, well, to some people, that meant stronger military, right? Stronger economics, more control, right? More. You had the Nazis, you had the Russians and communism. You had all these different groupings of individuals who came together as nations, and they said, we will control, right? One ring to rule them all. We've seen those kind of nations. We've seen those nations actually try to work together, haven't we? Yeah. And what's happened? Well, interesting, right? You shall be a blessing, though. This is the idea here. For Israel, it wasn't about more power is what makes you great. It wasn't about the riches. If we could be the richest nation, then we are the greatest. It wasn't about the riches. It wasn't about the power. It wasn't even about us being the best trade economy, right? It wasn't about any of those, or the best tourist place, right? That's not what made a nation great according to Israel. According to Israel, what made a nation great is this: you shall be a blessing. You never hear nations or politicians or leaders talk this way, do you? You want to be a great nation? Start giving, helping. Stop taking, right? Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, stop taking oil, stop taking resources, stop stripping away things from other people. Start giving, start being a blessing to the nations and the world around you. You want to be great? Well, by Israelite standings, by their standards, great was to be a blessing. You are judged by your greatness by how much you bless others. That was the idea, right? Like, what a shift. Because all the other nations during this time era, it was all about conquering, dividing, conquering more, gaining more and more spoils of the war. This is what it meant to be great. But Israel says, no, that's not it. Right? We have Paul, he's talking about Jesus here in the New Testament. I love this quote. He says, in everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak. Remembering the words of the Lord Jesus himself, saying, it is more blessed to give than receive. Here was a nation early on the scene who not only is saying, let's become monotheistic, they're also completely rearranging how to view greatness. You want to be great? Be a servant. You want to be powerful? Show weakness, right? Show humility, show love, compassion. It's like Deuteronomy 28 says this, or 6. When you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the third year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Notice this, the tithing that you give to your community. You need to set aside a certain amount to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. Beautiful. We need to be watching out for everyone, caring for each other. Is this saying divide everything equally and blah, blah, blah? Well, no, it's not saying that either. It's saying, though, we take care of each other. We help those who are in need. That's the deeper idea here. You want to be powerful? Be a blessing. How can you be a blessing? How can a nation choose to be a blessing? I think that's the question we should be asking. I think when we start asking that question, many of our politicians start to fall flat, don't they? Some of our leaders start to fall flat. But when we ask, how can we be a great nation, meaning how can we be a blessing to others, we might shift the way we respond globally and locally, especially within our churches. Let me continue. And I will bless those who bless you. The one who curses you, I will curse. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. Think about this one for a moment. When nations align with peaceful nations, historically, they experience peace. It almost sounds too simplistic, doesn't it? When nations align with destructive forces, violent, oppressive ones, they experience oppression themselves. Think about this. World War II, World War I, these different nations that rose up, all about power, conquering, dividing. These nations, they don't last long. And what happens to them? Well, we've seen over and over again, their economies are ruined. Their nations are divided. That's the very thing they sought to do. When you align with those destructive things, you become those destructive things. But conversely, positive relationships, think about this on an individual scale. It's so beautiful when you get this. When you align yourself with people who are empowering, people who are positive, people who bring you up, you experience the blessings too. When you walk with people, good, loving, giving people, you become a good, loving person. It just rubs off on you. When you walk with certain people, your walk begins to look the same as theirs. We know this as a nation, and we also know this individually. I might even ask you this right now. What kind of people, what kind of movements are you walking with? Are they violent, destructive ones? Or are they peaceful ones that bring life and order and blessing? You can see it by their actions, can't you? What kind of movements, what kind of people are you walking with? Because that is the kind of people and nation and movement that you will become. Scientifically, I love this idea. We are all made of atoms, right? Molecules just floating around. And what we know scientifically, if you pull back and then you just go in deep, what you'll see is when you're with someone, when you're within even 3 feet of them, you are actually exchanging the very molecular substance that is you with them. You're exchanging molecules on this tiny, again, molecular scale. You are exchanging atoms, right? Part of you becomes part of them. It's a crazy thing. When we walk together, we physically, on a molecular scale, we become the thing we are with, the person we are with, the movement we are with. Our emotions, energetically, we do the same thing. Ever spend some time with someone who is just so up, so positive? You walk away feeling up, positive, but when they're down and they're just dragging, it's very easy to also become down and dragging too. Not to say that we ignore people when they're down and dragging, but no, but energetically, we pull and we share, don't we? Yeah, it's so fascinating. Who are you aligning with today? I'll continue. And Abraham went, and as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Now, keep in mind, 75, this is not an old age, but the idea here is Abraham has come to a place of wisdom. Not perfect wisdom. That's, again, 120 would be like your common idea with numbers. But 75 would be someone who has experienced some wisdom, some knowledge. They've had some experience. And now when you've had the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience, now you can begin inhabiting some of those spaces, can't you? Yeah. Once you gain some of the wisdom and the knowledge, you can begin living it, right? You can live it fully. Before, you were kind of messing up, you were kind of learning, you were in your 20s, you were trying every kind of thing you could try, you were doing crazy things. Now you've got some wisdom. Now you've got some experience. Now you can inhabit the thing. Yeah. Do you get the power of 75 here? Yeah, there's some beautiful Jewish concepts, traditions of interpretation with these numbers. And so again, they took all their possessions they had and they acquired, and the souls of Haran. Basically, understand this. When you look at Lot, the word Lot, the name Lot here, it actually means a pebble that's cast out. So again, this idea is they're pulling, they're moving, they're shifting, and it's a big movement. They're shifting things. They're moving. Even Sarah is the concept of like a new princess on a throne, right? There's newness, there's change, there's shifting, there's evolution. This is the idea here. And it's powerful. And this is, again, Israel. To be an Israelite means you are stepping into the new life journey. You're moving. Genesis 12, here we go. And the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I'll make you into a great nation. And look at this toward the bottom here. They went to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Now, again, Canaan. The concept of Canaan is not a new idea for most of us, right? If you're an Israelite, Canaan always has this understanding that Canaan is the place, again, where there's plenty. It's the place where there's a bounty, right? There's a bounty of goodness. There's food. There's resources. It's home, right? It's the new place we reside. It's filled with abundance. And so keep in mind, this begins the journey, right? They begin the journey. They're going to repeat it over and over and over again. They'll leave home, right? They'll travel for a time, 40 years. They'll wander, and then they'll move through the desert until they get to the promised land. This circular story is going to be told over and over again. And you're going to see it here with Abraham. They're stepping out. They're going to wander for a time until they finally get home, right? Their new home, Canaan. Yeah, it's beautiful. And even the word Canaan again means like a merchant, a place where trade and goods and everything, it's thriving. That's the idea of Canaan. Abram passed through the land until the place of Shechem, until the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanites were there in the land. So notice this. There's always going to be a shift. There's always going to be a struggle in the journey. He meets the Canaanites. There's going to be some conflict, right? The land is not really mine until I deal with my demons, until I deal with the anti-hero, right? The antagonist of the story. So Israel's going to have to deal with some enemies. And of course, they don't get deep into the story yet. You're going to find, though, for Israel, when they're wandering with Moses and Joshua and others, you'll see those stories even deeper, right? More details. But for this one, we know there's enemies. They're going to have to face those enemies. But here's the beauty. The beauty is the Lord says, your seed I will give this land. I promise you, you will be able to thrive here, even though it looks like those scary Canaanites are going to be really difficult to handle. I promise you, there will be a space for you here. Beautiful. I promise you there's going to be space here. And there he built an altar to the Lord. And again, this concept of the altar, I'm going to remember that the Lord has promised me this space, promised me that there is goodness. There is an end to the brokenness and the pain and the wandering. There's going to be an end to it. We're going to find home, right? These problems, these issues that you're dealing with, you will find your way home. Yeah, you're going to make it, right? There's life on the other side of this. That's the deeper promise for Israel. There's going to be life on the other side of this pain, this struggle, this wandering. You're going to experience Canaan. And notice this. It says he pitched his tent, right? Bel-El was to the west, and Ai was to the east. Do you see it? Again, he pitches his tent. His eyes are moving toward the promised land, right? And he notices again this beautiful image, east and west, right? Eden and away from Eden. Life and death. We've talked about those east and west. He pitches his tent in the middle. He pitches his tent in the middle because sometimes in the story, sometimes we get stuck in the middle. Sometimes we're in the middle. Sometimes we're in the middle of the journey, and that's where the life is, but that's where the problems are too, isn't it? That's sometimes where the conflict is. Sometimes we have to pause in between the then and the someday. Sometimes we have to take a moment, pitch our tent, stop, and look where we've been, consider where we're heading. Sometimes we have to stop and consider. Now, I show this slide here for a reason. Some of you know what this is, right? You're looking at this thing and you're like, oh yeah, Sony. It's a Walkman. You remember the Walkman, don't you? You had the Walkman. You put the cassette tape in. Some of us, we would listen all day and we'd hit the record button as the radio station's playing our favorite song, and that's how we got our songs, right? And then we'd play these songs over and over again on our cassette players, our Walkmans, and we had those old school earphones, right? The Walkman. But Walkman, they understood the CD was the next big thing. So they had the Sony Walkman, which was now the CD. But what you may not know about Sony Walkman, because Walkman's not really around anymore. They were approached by some individuals that said, look, the next thing is going to be MP3s. It's going to be a more digital format. It's going to be easier to carry. You're going to be able to carry a little thing around, and it's going to be digital, and you're going to have thousands and thousands of songs on this thing. And Sony Walkman said, no, we think that's not going to work. We're going to keep it back here. We think this is just a passing thing. It's just a little trend. It's not going to stick. Walkman did not follow the trend. But you know who did? Yeah, Apple did. And Apple now is the king, aren't they? And Steve Jobs said this, and I love this quote. He said, we looked at the past, we looked at the present, and we planned for the future. There was a moment where Steve Jobs says, you know what? I'm looking back. I see where we've been. I'm considering the future and where this is going. And I'm looking where we are right now. And once I do the hard work of seeing this, I am able to now move forward. And so Abraham in this moment, it's such a huge pinnacle moment for Israel. And Israel will get in these spaces over and over again. But for Abraham, he says, again, the founder of this new way to be human, right? The new way of viewing the world. They basically pitch their tent and they look at the past, they look at the future, and they understand the present, where they are, and then they begin to plan for what comes next. But it only happens when you build the altar, when you stop and you breathe and you consider the story. You consider where you've been, where you're going, and you pause enough to be present in the moment now. And for Israel, this is what they will call the meditative process. When you read some of the Psalms, they'll go through the process. They'll talk about the past. They'll talk about the future. But then the bulk of the psalm will be about where I am now. Even though I walked there and I consider there, I am here, Lord. Where are you? That's over and over their meditative process of how to be here right now, present where we are. Pitching your tent, stopping, meditating before you take the next big step. This is a very Jewish concept. And so, how do you take it home? How do we practice this? I'm going to borrow heavily from a guy named Rabbi Rashi, who was a medieval rabbi. And he said there were four different ways to approach this. And so one of them is take a moment, pause, and see the world around you. And he would do this with Psalms and Proverbs, even sometimes, over and over again. The Song of Psalms of Solomon. He would do this with many of these different verses. And so he would say, again, we get moving so fast sometimes, right? I think all of us know this, that we forget where we are. We forget where we've been. I can't tell you how many times I am driving from work and I forget to look out and, oh yeah, there's mountains there, right? I know people, when I lived in California, beautiful, beautiful weather every day. I remember not taking advantage of it. Sometimes I'd be like, there's a cloud in the sky. I feel like, not worth going out today. You forget how beautiful it is. If you just take a moment, pause, and see the world around you, it causes you to say, I should enjoy this day. I shouldn't waste it, right? I should take advantage, stop, look around, see the beauty that's there because it is there. I think sometimes we just forget. Sometimes we have to stop and pitch our tent right in the middle and see the beauty that's all around us. In the past, in the future, looking forward, in the present now, look, see what's there. Another concept he says is when the Jewish rabbi will sit, they will oftentimes begin to think of the different goals and concepts of the past and present, where we wanted to be and where we are now. And so this concept here, make lists of the goals you had in the past and appreciate the ones you've met. And so for them, they built altars. And they'd look back and they'd see the different spaces they'd been in, the altars that were built for us today. Think about, you had certain goals and ideas of where you wanted to be. Did you meet some of them? Did you take time to celebrate some of those things? Sometimes stopping and appreciating the fact that you did get there, right? You're doing the thing. You're actually there, and you got too busy to even appreciate the fact that you got there. Yeah, that thing that you started, it's going. Enjoy it, right? Enjoy the thing. And then lastly, take opportunities to thrive now. That's a very Jewish idea, right? Just enjoy Shabbat, right? Some of you will stop on a Friday night and you'll just be present to family, community. Whether it's Saturday or Sunday, whatever day you take, you decide to just be present to nature, to family, to your spouse, to your kids. You stop, you remind yourself, I'm a human being, I'm not a machine, right? You take those opportunities to thrive in the space that's provided for you. You stop and you take time with the breath you've been given, the life you have, right? You take time to be present and thrive in the moment, to enjoy the moment. It's like a bowl of ice cream. I think sometimes we get the ice cream and we just are in such a hurry. We eat it so fast, we couldn't even tell what the flavor was. I think sometimes we need to just stop and say, it's mint chocolate chip. I remember eating mint chocolate chip when I was younger. I'm going to enjoy this. And you slowly just eat it and you enjoy it and you enjoy the people you're with. This is the idea of stopping, thriving. For the rabbi, for the Jewish people, that meant on their Shabbat. They would come together. They would eat tons of food. They'd talk about their past. They'd spend time, families together. They'd listen to Torah. They would thrive in the moment. This is what's happening for Israel. When they hear Abraham is on this mountaintop and he's looking at the past and the present and he's learning to sit in this space now, that is him enjoying the meal. That is him enjoying the goals they've met, enjoying the space they've come to now, enjoying knowing he was there. Now he's here. Someday he'll be there. Let me enjoy this. That's the deeper idea here in the story. And maybe you might be able to live that too. Maybe this weekend, maybe today, whenever it is, you might be able to live in that too. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this chapter 12, 1 through 9. Next week, I think you're going to even enjoy the next one even more. But as always, please consider donating. ethos-church.org/donate. And if you want to join us on our, we do these twice a month. We meet together, Ethos Living Rooms. If you want to join the discussions, email me, let me know. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Continue sharing this. Again, we're going to build this YouTube channel. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We love you. And please take time to thrive. Take time to look back, look at the future, but then enjoy the present. Pitch your tent. Enjoy the space you're in. Take care. We'll see you next week.